Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, a powerhouse restaurateur, a farm-to-table pioneer, nominated 6 times for a James Beard Award, who's got a singular vision of how to run a restaurant right. Here's Martha Sanders Hoover. Martha, how are you? Thanks for doing this.
Oh my gosh, David, I'm doing great. And thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast.
So glad to have you here. You have been quoted as saying you want people to redefine food value. What do you mean by that?
Oh, you start with such a heavy subject.
Okay, what's your favorite color? No, come on. This is the whole thesis of what you do.
It is. So, you have to zoom way out and to understand where food, restaurants, food distribution, farming, all that exist in our culture and in our economic structure. And as soon as I understood that people defined values surrounding food as the most they can get for the least amount of money, the most for the least, it shifted my thinking. And so much of what is wrong with food system, the distribution, how we get food, how we serve food, I think is structured in that value statement that when it comes to food, all that matters is the most for the least. And when you define food like that, if that's your value proposition, then what happens is people growing food, serving food, making food are the ones who are at the bottom of the rung. And those values also bleed over into what people are willing to pay for food. And what happens if you're not willing to pay for food, you're not willing to support people getting paid to produce food. And I think that's a real problem. So my idea has always been to tell people this is not, my restaurants are not where you're going to get the most for the least, but you are going to be getting, you will know the value you receive. The value received is you will get food that is quality. You'll get quality of product, quality of experience, quality of service, and you get a commitment from my company that we share all of this with the people who work for us and with our community. So that's what I mean when I say we need to redefine the value of food.
Well, we Americans are famous around the world for massive portions. That's not going to change, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are always movements to realize that you don't need massive portions to feel well taken care of. And if you're talking specifically about a restaurant or even grocery store experience, I think, you're talking about very complex systems, and you're also talking about what people maybe don't consider is literally the number of hands, the number of fingers that touch whatever item you are buying at the grocery store or having served to you at a restaurant. And when you consider the number of people involved from growing to harvesting, ripening, distributing, cooking, serving, washing, everything, it becomes a much different economic conversation.
Well, you're getting into obviously some heavy political conversations regarding, for example, who picks our fruits and vegetables.
Yep.
Regarding the push for a higher minimum tipped wage, which, by the way, do you support that? Is that in place in Indianapolis?
It is not in place in Indiana. No, it is not. We are a very conservative state. And
well, do you pay above the minimum?
Yes. And so much of that is based on, here's the secret to the restaurant business. It's not an art gallery. It's not a museum. It's a business. And businesses, in order to thrive, have to be profitable. And businesses in my world, in order to thrive, have to treat their staff a certain way and their customers a certain way. And when you're in the world of hospitality, it is not good enough. I believe it's never been good enough, but today even more so. Is it not good enough to bend over backwards for your customer and do the exact opposite to the people who make your customers' experience possible? But you mentioned that Americans, with their love for large portions and cheap pricing, we think we pay a ton of money of our income for food. But the United States, we are at the bottom of the list as to every country is ahead of us as to the portion of pay that goes towards food. And that includes what they used to call developing countries, undeveloped countries, to the most Western and developed countries. We are at the bottom of that heap. But this is a huge cultural shift, and I don't think any huge cultural shift happens overnight. And I do think the restaurant industry, just like the grocery industry, is really pivotal to making people understand that if you want to treat people with equity and fairness and paying them properly and giving them the benefits we could also talk about benefits, having to be met by employers instead of our government, because we really don't provide a lot of safety net for people who struggle.
So you are putting your beliefs into operation, into reality in your restaurant group.
It's what I did for 35 years. And a lot of it, David, is because I opened up my first restaurant in 1989. I always like to say at a time before food was discovered, number one. And number two, I did not come from the food world. And as a result, I have not been broken by the food world. I did not know that my ideas were radically different, and I didn't know that they were not part of the food world template of how to do a restaurant.
You approached it like zero-based budgeting.
Yes, sir.
Starting from what are the building blocks to do this, as opposed to how does everybody else do this?
Yes.
Let's back up to your personal story that'll get us to the restaurant.
Sure.
Are you a foodie? I mean, I hate that word. I'll put air quotes around it. But have you always been drawn to good food?
100%.
As a child?
As a child, and I'll tell you why. I was born in Brooklyn, but by the time I was 3 months old, I was living in Galveston, Texas. And I had parents who, yes, it was crazy. I had parents, particularly my father, was incredibly food driven. He was a gourmand. He was a foodie before the term was created. And his turning point was being a poor kid growing up in the Depression, right? And food was so lacking in his life that he was he was just hungry, and he was hungry for knowledge. And as a World War II guy in France, he's the one who came home saying, not only did he teach himself the language, but he also learned about French food. And food became very much part of his reason for living. And that was passed on to me. Now, we grew up in Galveston, Texas, so we would drive I'm Jewish, my family's Jewish. We went home twice a year, home to Brooklyn and home to the Bronx, where my parents were from. And they went home during the two major Jewish holidays of Passover and the High Holy Days. And I was introduced to food culture and food and these phenomenal small grocery stores that were extremely narrowly focused. The produce store, the meat market, the bakery, the Italian bakery next to the Jewish bakery, all that stuff. At some point, my father's career changed and we moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. We still, however, kept going to New York by car. This is before seatbelts. They would just throw the three of us in the back seat and go at it. And we would go to New York, and I had a very pivotal experience when I was probably 12 or so. It must have been one of the fall holidays, and it must have been one of the years where the fall holidays fell in early September. And I remember going from my grandmother's brownstone in Brooklyn and walking with my father to the produce market on the corner, and we were grocery shopping. At some point, we walked into this produce stand in Brooklyn, and there was a carton of a big box of melons, and it said Posey County melons. And the price was outrageous. I don't remember the price, but I remember it was outrageous. And my father said to me at that moment, he said, this is amazing. Posey County, these are the best melons grown. This is before California became the supermarket of all produce for the United States. He was like, and I had never heard of a Posey County melon. And he told me Posey County was in Indiana. And I'm from Indiana, and I had not heard of a Posey County melon. And it just struck me and I didn't probably have the language to state this then, but now, of course, I do in retrospect. It struck me that I was living in an agricultural state, growing this remarkable produce that was appreciated in the larger city, but not available to me in our small town of Indianapolis, Indiana. So food has always been very, very central to my family life, including my own family life when I had children. And then I extended that centrality, what meant so much to me, by opening my first restaurant. And by the way, we did serve Posey County melons back in 1989.
I was gonna ask you, what is a Posey? Is it green? Is it orange? Is it familiar? Similar to anything I know?
It's a species of cantaloupe, and it is soft fleshed and juicy and amazing. And the peak period for taste and ripeness is late summer, and they're late summer melons that are grown in southern Indiana.
So you grow up appreciating good food.
Yes.
You made a teenage trip to France, apparently.
I did. 3 days after I graduated from high school, I was still 17. I gave myself a gift. I babysat all through high school, saved money. I was kind of a nerd. I was one of those people that read gourmet magazines. I came home and watched. We had 2 shows on our PBS channel that happened to be on right when I got home from school.
What were the shows?
Galloping Gourmet.
Graham Kerr, I loved him.
Right? Amazing.
He was fantastic, yes.
Oh my gosh, Galloping Gourmet. And then, of course, Julia Child's series for PBS.
Right.
And my father took Gourmet magazine and read it as if it was the Bible. And I would get the leftover magazines, and I too would read it as if it were like something that really was an important journal.
When you went to France,
yeah,
was there a culinary epiphany?
Oh my God, yes. I realized within 3 days of being in Paris that I would rather go to a street market or a Parisian produce stand than I would an art museum. And don't tell my oldest daughter, who is an art person.
I won't say a word.
Don't say a word, although she knows. She holds it against me. But truthfully, before the term food culture was out there, I learned early on that I'd rather sit at an outdoor cafe and watch people and take in the experience of listening to conversations and sipping a beautiful coffee served beautifully and having the most perfect baguette of my life, truly of my life at that point, than I would go, to any of the tourist places that I was meant to go to. And then I had again, another life-changing experience. One of the reasons I went to France is my father, as I mentioned, was a World War II vet and spent his entire career in the army, which was short-lived, in the small villages of France. And he befriended somebody in a very small town. And I had the person's name, and it was important to my father for me to connect with him and to tell him how much my father missed that relationship and how much the friendship meant to him. And I found him. And he and his wife and 4 children welcomed me into their home. And they lived in a very rural existence. And he was a schoolmaster, he was a teacher in a very small village. They opened up their house for me, and his wife cooked for me. And not only did she cook for me, she showed me how to cook. And one of the things I will never forget is they had chickens and roosters running around their backyard. And when it was time for her to make a roasted chicken, she went out and killed the chicken, and she showed me how to do that. She also showed me how to make a perfect coq au vin using the blood of a rooster. And this sounds really gruesome, but as a 17-year-old, this was, we talk a lot today about how people don't have a real relationship to how food is created and where food is from and how it is grown and how animals are raised. Well, I got to see that when I was 17. And, when you put it in perspective as to when that was, this was the, early 70s, late 60s. It was pretty mind blowing.
Okay, so you grow up with a food-obsessed father. You go to France.
Well, I go to France. I meant to stay for a couple of weeks. I end up staying for over 3 months. And all I did when I was there was eat.
So it stands to reason that you immediately came home and embarked on a career in the culinary arts, right?
Yeah, that stands to reason, but that's not how life turned out.
How did it turn out?
Well, I went to college like, people my generation did. And after college, I went to graduate school, also known as 3 years of me figuring it out, a default education. I went to law school, and I ended up graduating from law school and becoming a sex crimes prosecutor in the second sex crimes unit formed in the United States. And maybe it wasn't the second, but it was one of the very early sex crimes unit. And even though that sounds miles apart, the experience of creating something in the law and then creating a restaurant had way more in common than you would imagine.
But wait, you looked up one day. As I understand it, you were a prosecutor for a number of years.
Yeah.
Then you left.
At that point, I had 2 children. I was frustrated because there were not opportunities where I worked. It's really hard to have this very demanding job of being a sex crimes prosecutor, but doing it part-time or half-time. You have to do it full-time. Little did I know that there is nothing that you can do part-time in the restaurant world. But I also, yeah, I did. I spent a year or so as a stay-at-home mother. And I remember calling my husband, no cell phones, landline, calling my husband, and he was a litigator, a lawyer in a large law firm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and getting to the receptionist who said that he was busy. And I said, oh no, I have to talk to him. I have to talk to him right now. So she patches me through immediately, and he's in the conference room and he pushes speaker. And I think he's expecting me to say, meet me in the emergency room. One of the kids has fallen or something. And I said to him, oh my God, the Gourmet magazine came today and there is an article on morel mushrooms. To wit, he pushed the button and picked up his phone and said, get a goddamn job. And I was like, okay, I'm opening a restaurant.
Had you been like in the back of your mind thinking, dreaming about opening a restaurant?
As someone whose favorite activity in the world is going to restaurants, studying them, their lighting, their sound, the decor, the food, level of service, the everything, just the vibe, the smell. It was always in the back of my mind. And again, historical context. Today parents get bragging rights when their kids go to the Culinary Institute. Back when I was growing up, especially as the child of European immigrant parents who came here, and the holy grail was to get educated and to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or a teacher, going into the food business was seen as a step backwards. I had to fight that a little bit in my own head. But truthfully, it was always in the back of my head that I thought that opening a restaurant would be something that I could do. And because I had never worked in a restaurant, I did not know, which is the best thing that ever happened to me. Not working in a restaurant and opening up a restaurant were the luckiest two things that ever occurred in my life.
So what'd you do?
I opened a restaurant.
You called your husband, you said, Gourmet Magazine's great.
And he said, get a fucking job. And he came home and I said, you know what? I think I'm going to try this. I think this would be really exciting. By the way, he too is a major food person, a major wine person. Our honeymoon was spent in France. Of course, we were in Paris, and then we went through Beaujolais and Champagne. We spent a long time. We had no money. It's amazing what you could have done 44 years ago on a budget. And there was something extraordinarily, not just inspirational, but experiential about this, because today you just have to look on Instagram and you have a feeling that you have been there. I grew up at a time when the only way to have that feeling was to actually go.
And to a great extent, I miss that.
I
miss having to go to a place that this dish is endemic to this place.
Also, there's this, I think it's unearned credibility that certain businesses in food get just because their food looks right on Instagram. And I totally miss the days where if you needed to know what something, if you had the curiosity to know what something, where its origins were, what it tastes like, the best of, you went and you did it yourself.
So you opened your first restaurant.
I did, not knowing that I was pregnant with my third child.
Excellent timing. Excellent timing.
Yeah.
Tell me about the restaurant. It was Cafe
Pot au choux.
Pot au choux,
Yes.
which means what?
Cream puff in French. So I opened my first restaurant in 1989 in the neighborhood in which my family we lived in. I could walk or ride a bike to this location. Cafe Pot au choux was the first new tenant in a neighborhood strip mall and I was the first new tenant since the early 40s. Indianapolis at the time was a testing ground for large chain restaurant concepts. So just like Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis had the demographics that they were all looking for. So if there was an Olive Garden to be tweaked, they put it in Indianapolis. If there was a Red Lobster to be tweaked, Indianapolis. And as a result, the push towards local, there was no local. We did not have a history of ethnic restaurants in Indianapolis. It's a very homogeneous community, and no one was putting restaurants in local neighborhoods. So I defied all those odds, not really knowing that they were odds. But I did it. I defied it.
What'd you serve? What was the deal?
It was really a glorified coffee shop. My original menu had a handful of items on it. It was the food that I was comfortable making for my family and guests at my home, which was also how I looked at the restaurant. I'm like, this is a neighborhood restaurant. These neighbors are my neighbors. They're potentially not just customers, but they could be friends. They could be invited to my home. And that was my early interpretation of hospitality. And again, at a time in the restaurant industry when none of that was happening, I knew it was unique, but I didn't realize, this sounds kind of dumb, how rarefied it was and how it would take 30 some years for the industry to catch up.
Well, you were in the first wave, certainly in the Midwest, of farm to table.
Agreed.
You open a breakfast and lunch joint.
Yeah. And I did that, by the way, because I was nursing a baby and I had two other kids I had to pick up in the carpool line. Breakfast and lunch made the most sense. And that also was something that was an obstacle because at that moment, no one thought seriously about the breakfast lunch segment.
Really?
No.
Then you take it up a notch by relying on fresh, local, seasonal, farm to table ingredients.
I did do that. Two reasons. I did it because in all my years feeding my children and my family, I have always hated large grocery stores. This was, I don't know, 25 years before a Whole Foods was a Whole Foods. And I went to farm stands. We live in a beautiful agricultural state, so we had farm stands available to me, and I went to the local butcher shop and all that kind of stuff. I had no credibility in the restaurant world, and believe it or not, back then, without credibility, there weren't a lot of distributors interested in talking to some woman, who pregnant, who had never opened up a restaurant before, opening up a restaurant named Cafe Pot de Choux, a word they couldn't pronounce, wanting to serve arugula, a product that they did not carry. So I had to search it out. It was better for customers, but it was also an answer to an issue I had where the large distributors did not think that I would be successful and did not extend credit to me or whatever it was.
There were not a lot of women restaurateurs back then.
No, there were not. People thought that pot de choux was a hobby, that I was a hobbyist, that there was no way breakfast or lunch was successful, that neighborhood restaurants were not critical to the fiber of a city, et cetera, et cetera. But all those things that should have been huge obstacles turned out to be remarkable inspiration for others. And one thing that I found very early on that there were plenty of people in the restaurant industry as it existed in Indianapolis, even though it was not sophisticated, all that kind of stuff, who did not feel welcome working in other restaurants or because they, female talent did not feel welcome in these other restaurants, but they had a home with me. Also, the hours in which I was operating worked really well for working parents. And I was a working parent. I had a toy corner in my first restaurant. I had a toy corner, and people assumed that that was meant for all the stroller parents who came in to have coffee and an omelet during the day with their kids, and they could let the kids play in the toy corner. It was really meant for me because I had my son, David. I opened with the baby and I needed to nurse him. So I would sit down in that area and nurse him and then go back on the line. That son is a chef in Los Angeles. So food is genetic, and the love of food and food culture and commensality, the community that you create at your table are very much part of my family's DNA.
I'm looking at the pot de choux menu. How do I say this in a good way? You don't seem to be trying to break a whole lot of boundaries. I mean, it's omelets, it's cinnamon toast, it's waffles, it's eggs done various ways.
It's tuna fish sandwich. It's like, no, I think one of the reasons why pot de choux is a legacy brand, it stood the test of time, is because we have refused since day one to be in trend. When you're in trend, what happens? Things fall out of trend, and you're always reinventing yourself.
Now, this is going to sound like a mean question. Yes, you're using local ingredients, but does that really matter on ricotta pesto toast? I mean, am I going to tell that, are they local eggs?
Yeah, they are local eggs, actually.
Can I taste a difference when I have your local eggs in my Cuban breakfast? that you have on the menu?
Yes.
Really?
100%. The eggs that we use, the eggs, and by the way, I have chickens at home, and there is such a distinction, remarkable distinction to the palate, to the eye, to the smell of an egg that is fresh as opposed to an egg that's been sitting in a distribution center for 8 weeks before it gets to you. So, yes, you can tell. And by the way, yes, local matters. And it matters because you're supporting your own community. And it matters, big picture for sustainability and the earth, but really, you're supporting you're saying you're doing what you tell people you are doing. That's not so much greenwashing as really believing that this is the best way to deliver on the values that you've told your customer you're delivering on, and that is quality of product.
You have, what, 7 locations of Pot au Choux?
Yeah, we're getting ready to open up an additional location. And there are other restaurants under my umbrella. One's two locations of a pizzeria, and then we have a little French bistro. Shouldn't shock you at all, called Petit Choux, which is a gem, a one-off gem of a little my version of the first bistro I ever walked into in Paris. And then we have a restaurant on our public greenway called Public Greens.
So if I go to your bistro, standards, onion soup, steak frite, what?
That's it. Am not trying. You know what drives me crazy? When I go to a restaurant and I see something like, I had this the other day, a Caesar salad, but a Caesar salad that had tomatoes in it.
What?
Yes, yes. And they thought it was so fancy. They said it was a summer Caesar.
A2 Brute?
Yes, yes. So, you know what? I am in love with classics, and I'm in love with the classic way of creating classics. And I see no reason to take Coco Van and to add, I don't know, I come up with something, pea pods. It's just, no, these are perfect dishes that have stood the test of time. They are meaningful culturally, they taste good, they are they evoke a certain time and a certain experience. So petit choux, yeah, steak frites, onion soup,
Steak tartare, I'm looking at the menu here.
yeah, steak tartare.
Ooh, where do you get your mussels from Mussels Minier?
Well, we have a really trusted, we live in Indiana, we're landlocked. I always say it's an conundrum when you talk about local is I can't grow avocados locally, so I have to branch out, right? We have a trusted purveyor of seafood and we get exquisite mussels.
What about your duck? I've talked to a number of restaurateurs and chefs who tell me it's hard to get duck these days.
It is hard to get duck. My understanding is the Asian market, that most of the duck produced in the United States is they get more money to ship it overseas. But northern Indiana, actually, there is a company in northern Indiana that's one of the largest duck producers. So it's can be considered, our supplier for duck is considered to be a local supplier. And we use duck fat to fry our pommes frites in.
Oh, how quickly did this, I'll use the word, you have a culinary empire. Other budding restaurateurs, what do they need to do to be successful like you?
They need to show up and work. Restaurants are I know that sounds so glib.
No.
But you've got to live it and breathe it and taste it. You've got to want it really, really badly. What I did early on is I committed myself to this craft. I became a student of all things restaurant. I listened to people, whether it was staff or customers. I listened, but I ran a company that was not a democracy. I had very clear vision for the type of company I wanted to create. One of the lucky things when you're opening your own business is you have the ability to create a business in your own likeness. So this business was very much modeled after how I ate, how I lived, how I traveled, what I saw. And I was confident and sure enough that I wasn't special, but the opportunities that had been afforded me to travel and to eat and to observe, that I could translate them somehow to my own restaurants. But here's the thing, when you talk about restaurants as part of the food economy and the restaurant industry, the industry itself is so complex and it's so layered and it's so different. You have to distinguish yourself for starters. And one of the best ways you can distinguish yourself is by being profitable. The restaurant industry is, and I get it, it's varied, it's layered, it's complex, but at the heart of it are the mom and pop restaurants that chase profitability all day long. And it's just something I understood innately, that for me to grow and to do what I needed to do for my staff and my community and my business, we had to we just had to, going back to your opening question, we had to understand the value that we were asking people to buy into. And it was high quality at a price that supported it.
I'm looking duck confit. Apparently, I'm fixated on duck confit because I love duck confit.
Oh my God, my duck confit, seriously, I challenge any French person's grandmother to a duck confit contest.
But okay, you have it on for $31. I live between the New York and Philadelphia metro areas in a tourist area where that's a perfectly fine price for an entree. But is it in Indianapolis or are you on the high end?
This is a vexing question. Indianapolis we're firmly rooted in the Midwest, conservative Midwest pricing and policies and perspective on life. People, this is what gets me. We have a plethora of steakhouses in Indianapolis.
Well, St. Elmo's is supposed to be one of the best on earth, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's ground zero for restaurants in Indianapolis, and we're friends with the family that owns it and have a great deal of respect for what they've done over the years. But they are one of the few private steakhouses. There are national chains everywhere. And to get back to your question about pricing, no one looks twice at paying $12 at Ruth's Chris for a baked potato. But you get a restaurant owned by a female in Indianapolis, Indiana, and everyone questions $12 for an omelet.
Well, you're doing well. So how did you assuage the concerns?
Well, we delivered on what we told people we were delivering.
Was it a slow build or did it quickly hit?
It was both. It quickly hit and it was a slow build. It quickly hit, but what also quickly hit was the realization, and this is one of the sad facts of restaurant world in 2025 and beyond, is that the amount of profitability is limited. You cannot really charge what you need to charge to make a 20-30% profit. My Apple phone, for instance, Apple makes way, 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 way more than percentage wise on their phone than any small restaurateur makes on their menu.
Are there enough people in Indianapolis willing to pay this kind of money?
Yeah, because we delivered on what we promised people. We said, we're going to give you high quality. You're going to taste and see and feel the difference. And not only that, we're going to do it in a distinguished way. We're redefining hospitality. And not only that, our spaces are welcoming to all. They're what I dubbed years ago as sacred spaces. Everyone's just going to feel welcome coming in here. It doesn't matter if you're a customer who comes every day or a customer who comes when it's your anniversary, you're going to know that you are welcome here. It doesn't matter what demographic group you belong to, you're going to be welcome here. And we didn't just say that to our customer, we said that to our staff. And then we said to writ large, we said, and we are going to give back to the community. This is what you're paying for. You're paying for shared prosperity. It helps my company stay stable. It helps my staff have thriving lives. It helps the community, and you're actually kind of getting a bargain for what you're eating because you're getting really good food. So that all worked. But what I started to say when you asked if it was quick or a slow build, and I said it was both, what you realize in a mom and pop restaurant is that you are capped. You're not making 20 to 30% profitability, right? And it's gone down as the more restaurants have expanded. And I think that average restaurant profitability rate, according to the National Restaurant Association, is something like 5%. I mean, that's shit. You are working your fingers to the bone for 5% profit. You're doing it, and that's just the reality. So what happens is, in order to make it work, you have to expand. It's the only way. They're marketing reasons, they're branding reasons, but it's really because you cannot live off of the profits of one restaurant.
You talked about giving back. Let's discuss the Potashoe Foundation.
Gladly. I'm so proud of this organization. It's 10 years old and it has changed remarkably. But what I love about the foundation is the impact that it has made on our community.
What does it do? What you fund this? What happens?
The company is a funder, but we also rely on donations from the public. We rely on grants. We're no different than any not-for-profit, other than the fact that we are grassroots, we are small, we are not heavily leveraged, and we do not have a ton of layers. And what we do is, the Indianapolis Public Schools is the largest public educational system in the state of Indiana. And the schools in the late 60s did away with scratch cooking in their cafeterias and went to a heat and serve model. And that was obviously for economic reasons. But what happened in the time period since is we have dumbed down food, and in dumbing down food that we serve our children, we have served them food that is nutritionally poor. And, when you are serving a kid a meal that is, I don't know, $2.70 a meal, it goes back to this value of the most you can get for the least amount of food. Let's say the average luncheon served in Indianapolis to a kid is $2.50 worth of food. When you look at the number of people whose hands are in that $2.50 and realize that at every step of the way, someone is making a profit, including the school, what happens is the end product, the food, is the worst case scenario food. And what we also know is, scientifically, when kids eat well, they do better in school. There are less disciplinary issues and there are less health issues. Obesity among children is a huge issue, especially in poor communities where they don't have access to quality food. So our entire model is to return school cafeterias to scratch-made cafeterias and to feed children not only higher quality food, but to serve them with dignity and respect. And in the process, we not only can scientifically measure that the kids that we serve do better. They do better academically, they do better physically, they do better in terms of discipline, they do better in sports, they do better in every metric that you can figure out. But also, we are training people. We are a workforce development program as well. We are training people in the culinary space and school cafeterias. And those people have thriving wage jobs with not just benefits, but also with opportunities for career growth.
The description of the foundation that I've read is that it's serving meals to, quote, food insecure children.
True. The 90% of children who attend the Indianapolis public school system could be defined as food insecure. 90%. What we do is we go into a school cafeteria, we retool it so that it can become a scratch kitchen. We train people in the community, usually people who live in the neighborhood surrounding the schools. We train them and we hire these people so that they have thriving wage jobs. And we serve the children who attend the school the food that is made in these kitchens by these people.
Why do you give such a damn?
Oh man, because you know what? I have been so fortunate from the get go. And I think a lot of it is the values in which I grew up, in which giving back is insanely important. I also think it's really hard to see the disparity within my restaurants are, look, my restaurants are in beautiful neighborhoods. And people walk in every day who can afford to spend $30 for breakfast without looking back. And most of my customers don't just come in once a week, they come in 5 times a week. But within several blocks of each of my restaurants are neighborhoods that have nothing. And I just think it's wrong. And again, we talked a little bit earlier about the lack of safety net for people. Even in the company, we recognized that there was a lack of safety net for people who work in my company and people work in the industry. And 15 years ago, I created what we call the Potashu Emergency Employee Relief Fund, which was funded by the company to help people with their emergency needs. Just why do I give a damn? Because I'm human. I've got eyes. I've got feelings. It's also the right thing to do.
Martha, you are terrific.
Oh, thank you, David.
It's such a delight to meet you. Now I have a good new friend in Indiana.
When are we going to get together and have a meal together?
I'm going to make that happen.
I'll come to you.
Oh, perfect. I'll cook you some scallops from the fishing port here.
Ooh,
It's a deal. Come on down.
I'll bring the wine. Your wife will approve.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate this conversation.
Martha Sanders Hoover on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. I'll see you next time.